Greetings, Kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome back to our World of Darkness and the start of the playlist for Gehenna War. That's right, I do actually plan on doing one of these for every single one of the books. I've just been focusing on the core book because I'm so far behind on everything. Today I decided to wear my Sabbat swag, not that you can see what's going on most of the time, but I figured with the Gehenna War, that's the best time to wear the Sabbat shirt, right? So here we go. So those of you who are new to the concept of cover to cover, which is what this video is. This is the first video in the Gehenna War playlist, where we are going to go through all of the things like disciplines and lore sheets and things like that that can be found in this book. Today, I am just going to spend some time reading this book cover to cover, and I'm going to discuss the various things about this. I'll pull out little bits of artwork here and there and things like that, but basically I'm going to go over and do a review for this beautiful book so that we can discuss whether or not this book is worth having added to your World of Darkness library. I haven't been able to read this whole thing, but I have seen some things in it, and I will tell you right now that it is definitely worth being in my library, so we will go ahead and see if it is worth being in yours. So, I guess first thing we should do is take a look at this gorgeous cover art. This picture is just amazing, and it really does bring in a lot of fun to what we're seeing here, but it also brings in a lot of dark tones. When you look at it, you can see a building burning in the reflection of his glasses. Just this is a pure vampire lost in the throes of war and what he is participating in. And that's exactly what this book is all about. This book is going to cover a lot of situations involving what's happening with the Gehenna War and how Kindred existence can be altered by it. Alright, so let's take a look at this, the eternal struggle at your doorstep at the very front of the book. From incessant intrigue to blazing action, Gehenna War brings the machinations of the elders and secret societies to your chronicle. Hunt the elders who were supposedly beckoned away. Do you fight for the will of an ancient, a chance at the forbidden sin of Diablerie, or to protect what truly matters to you? Gehenna War provides material both for players and storytellers to make the game sing, focusing on fast-paced action scenes and how those scenes can be woven into stories and chronicles. The Gehenna War contents, that's basically what we're looking at here, an overview of the Gehenna War and the impact on the Kindred sects, 7 Methuselahs active in the Gehenna War, rules for creating action-focused characters for action chronicles, new combat options and equipment, player and storyteller-focused overviews of action chronicles, 14 distinct factions fighting in the Gehenna War, 4 pre-written stories to drop into any chronicle, advice for using bestial failures and messy criticals in any chronicle, 3 lore sheets, 9 new advantages and disciplines, and 19 new discipline powers, rituals, ceremonies, and formula. Gehenna War is a source book for Vampire the Masquerade, a storytelling game of personal and political horror. Now, I want to say that I was very lucky to have gotten a look at this book a little bit during Gen Con. I got to run into some people from Renegade. They were nice enough to let me check some stuff out, and I got a sneak peek in this stuff, and I'm massively excited to incorporate what this has in it in my games themselves. I like just the plain white Gehenna War Vampire the Masquerade. This is very nice. Alright, we got our credits. Table of contents. Alright, now the first thing that I want to talk about is this beautiful piece of artwork, which obviously is Theo Bell. And the person who's standing with him, I am assuming is most likely Tyler. Patricia of Bolingbroke herself. There's nothing saying that this is, but the man in leather with the baseball cap and the shades, that is without a doubt Theobald. But the person who's with him, I can't not think that this is Tyler. And they have just gotten done doing something. I love the artwork, the tones, the colors. It's fits in with the 5th edition style so well. Okay, guys, I just read through the introduction to the Gehenna Wars, and I'm not really one to get sucked into a book when it comes to the introduction. I'll fully admit that a lot of the times I actually just forget it completely because it doesn't give you much information other than, you know, passing glance of why we wrote this book and things like that. And there is obviously the maturity warning in this, but there is some very interesting details in this. Behind me, first off, is actually an unfinished letter written by Theobald describing the situation that's happening with the Sabbat and the warfare and why he does what he does. That right there was worth so much. Just reading it and his own words just kind of like brought around a whole new recognition of what is actually going on with the Sword of Cain. And when I say that, I mean what's actually going on with them, because I'm realizing that the reason we're seeing such a degradation of the Sabbat in the antagonist book and things like that is because we're not dealing with the same thing anymore that we've dealt with before. And we already know this. We know that World of Darkness has been pushing this, and this has actually been kind of disappointing for a few people who like to play the Sabbat. But in my opinion, after reading just the introduction of Gehenna War, and I'm sure I'm going to have more revelations of thought when it comes to these guys as I read, there's no longer the Sabbat anymore. There are 2 versions of the Sabbat out there. There's the ones that stayed home and are trying to rekindle what they had, perhaps the Thin Bloods and the Panders trying to keep going what the Sabbat could have been if it wasn't such a tyrannical rule under Clan Lasombra and the spiritual guidance of the Tzimisce. But then there's like the stuff that's overseas, the ones that the Lasombra retreated from and came and joined the Camarilla. The reason why the Tzimisce backed out of the Sword of Cain, because they realize what they're doing. Why we don't see too many mentions of paths of enlightenment anymore, because when you separate yourself from humanity, you become easy pickings for these Methuselahs that are wanting to utilize you as a weapon. The Sabbat that are involved in the Gehenna War, yeah, they went to devour the elders and fight the ones who they assumed were running from something, or finally go toe to toe with the enemies they've been preparing for 500 years to fight. But humanity is what keeps you close. And now that version of the Sabbat, not all of the Sabbat, I want to point that out from what I'm understanding reading this. Not all of the Sabbat, just the Sabbat who went and fought at the Gehenna War and lost themselves in the drama, in the conflict. They're nothing more than animals and just agents for the very things that they themselves were fighting against. And it's dramatic and it's horrible to hear, but it also makes a lot of sense because they gave up so much of themselves for their cause that they didn't have much left to fight with or fight for. Now, the book goes on to talk about what types of chronicles you can have, and they actually have like a listing of the Gehenna War stories that they run, and whether or not they're street level or higher Kindred effect, cosmic horror almost style things, and that lists in this. The introduction is just very well put together and engaging. It's not just oh, we need to stop and acknowledge what's going on and this is a mature game. Yes, that stuff is in there, but it actually does go into a deeper aspect, a resonance of this story. I'd also like to take a minute to talk about this picture that's in the end of the introduction. This is obviously some sort of the picture screams sorcerer. I really can't say obvious because who knows what the hell's going on or what the hell people are wearing. But like, the first thing that came to mind when I saw him was, is this Karl Strecht? Is this the oldest that we have of Clan Tremere? Is he at the Gehenna War fighting and attempting to suppress information on the Antediluvians and Elders like he always has? As we sit in front of this portrait of the mighty Theo Bell, let's discuss Chapter 1, shall we? Chapter 1 of this book goes into a few different directions. It talks about what the Gehenna War looks like to the rest of the world. Why the Gehenna War puts itself in places that it does. What it actually is. At least ideas of what it actually is. Who it affects, how it affects them. And also goes into a nice listing of several ancients that are active in the Gehenna War. Chapter 1 is packed full of information. And it mentions a lot of groups. It mentions the Anarchs, the Camarilla, the way Artachists, Independents, we'll just say that. It talks about different factions. It does actually mention a number of factions and how they act. And for those of you who are not familiar with the concept of factions, what that is are groups that are smaller than a sect. So not as big as the Camarilla or the Sabbat. The Sabbat actually might be considered a faction nowadays. But the idea is that it's larger than a coterie, but smaller than a sect. But it goes into the Nkanu and a little bit of just a slight information on the Ashira. It kind of blends it in with the Camarilla like it always does. And I know there's a lot of people out there who have issues with the concept that they place the Gehenna War's main stories and stuff like that when it talks about like the horrible things that are happening in the real world. And I kind of agree on that overshadowing of what's happening in our lives with this fictional horror kind of feels ill taste, but it also kind of makes sense because they're not blaming, when you read this, they're not blaming the wars and the conflicts and the atrocities that we're experiencing in the real world on Kindred. They're letting the humans own that, which they should, because it's our stubbornness, our stupidity, our unwilling to work together that keeps things going like that. But what it's saying in Chapter 1 is that the Gehenna War is there because it's the perfect cover. And that a few more dead over here or another mass attack over there is not going to be noticed when humanity is already tearing itself apart. And I don't want to focus on that too much, but I do want to say that I do get what World of Darkness is saying when it comes to that. I get what Renegade or whoever really is putting these stories together like that. It's an interesting commentary on how like we don't notice the monstrosities because our own monstrosities are overshadowing. Real world drama. It's there. Anyway, chapter 1 though is engaging. It's a very incredible amount of information shoved in such a small little package, and it does give you a lot to think about how the Sabbat is working, how the Anarchs are going about things, the Camarilla, the Ashira. It goes over a nice overview of all of it and how to tie those things into your game. Basically, how to tie the Gehenna War into a game that is focused on those groups. Or how to use NPCs that are focused on the subject matter in possibly groups that don't even know really what is happening. Because it does touch on the fact that most Kindred do not know about the Gehenna War, or at least how ingrained in society it actually is. There's a good example of this with the Anarch saying that most vampires that you meet that are old were probably embraced in the 1960s. But now you're standing on a derelict ship watching an unbelievably ancient creature crawl out of sarcophagus with an alien hunger in its eyes that you cannot comprehend. And I love the description of that. But chapter 1, definitely, it's a hard-hitting chapter, and it talks about real-world issues compared to Vampire the Masquerade issues. And some people might find that distasteful. I personally think the fact that they are not blaming Kindred on our mess-ups in existence is, I think that kind of ties it up to being not disrespectful, but what monsters of this kind would do, using us as cover for their own machinations. Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the chapter that I think most y'all want, that most of y'all are going to spend the most time in. Chapter 3 is pretty insane when you look at it, because first off, it gives a wonderful list of what they call archetypes. Basically, it's a list of character concepts that could be used as NPCs or actually as use in building your own character to help you basically figure out what kind of character would fit in a Gehenna War chronicle. Following that, however, we have a nice long list of disciplines, which we will get to when we eventually cover the level by level for the Gehenna War, because that is going to happen. The disciplines that are listed here are for player characters and are amazing. The one that I am going to talk about is actually 3. There is a level 1 discipline for all 3 of them, Celerity, Fortitude, and Potence, that makes the use and the having of Celerity, Fortitude, and Potence so much more terrifying to those who are going up against you. Because it actually just allows you to re-roll rouse checks for all powers and use of the appropriate attributes. And I know that sounds ridiculous, and it kind of is, but it's a level 1, and if you are blood surging for your strength, for your dexterity, or your stamina, and you have these powers, it lets you re-roll if you fail that blood surge. So basically, most of the time, Celerity, Fortitude, and Potence won't cost you hunger to use, which is freaking phenomenal. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. These disciplines are amazing, and there is effectively at least one discipline level for every discipline noted, from animalism all the way down to thin blood alchemy. Like, it's intense, and they're amazing. I'll completely agree that when I first got access to the book, the first thing that I did is read through the disciplines, because I'm a child and I've got to look at the toys first. Also in this is a list of merits and flaws that are associated with the Gehenna War. So new stuff to add to pretty much any character out there, to flesh them out, make them more interesting, to add something new and exciting to your chronicle, because we've been playing 5th edition for several years now at this point. And merits and flaws are something that the players are always asking me for. These are great, and they have to do with feeding, with blood bonds, with connections to Methuselahs and antediluvians, and they're all pretty cool. I know there's not really much I can say about this chapter other than it's really cool, and I spent a lot of time just kind of like enjoying what is now accessible to me in my games. Now, beyond that, there's also new equipment, new magical items like relics and stuff like that. And when you're getting involved in ancient vampires, of course there's going to be some type of enhanced stuff. It also goes into different varieties of enhancing your combat, such as vehicular combat and things like that. Chapter 1 is probably something that most people are going to end up putting a tab or a bookmark in and returning to over and over again. I just realized I keep saying chapter 1. It is chapter 2. I'm just completely brain fried on what I just read here. Chapter 2 is where everybody will continuously return to get information. Chapter 3. Chapter 3 was beautifully written, and it is definitely a storyteller helper. I would actually say that it's very good for player characters as well, however, because what it does is talks about the ins and outs of an action plotline. Why would you do this? How do you do this? How do you make the characters engaged? What affects the character to make it a desperate situation? What an action chronicle means to characters with touchstones and things like that. This is a chapter that really goes through all of the important ins and outs on how to run effectively an action movie, how to properly write this script, how to make sure that the players have access to options, and how repercussions to actions can really change everything. This is definitely worth a read. Chapter 3 is just, as somebody who runs a political intrigue style game, and I don't enjoy combat as much, this book right here, this chapter specifically, chapter 3, is giving me so many ideas on what to do with my players and how they handle situations that could lead them into fighting instead of just talking through things. Alright, guys. Chapter 4. Let's talk Chapter 4 and what it means, because it has a couple of different things that could possibly have been split up into multiple chapters here, but it also fits with how it is. The first part of Chapter 4 goes over pacing a story, which typically you would think that if you're already running games, you'd know how to do this, right? Well, now you're entering highly descriptive combat situations where you're describing how damage happens, where you're trying to not make it just a group of friends sitting around aggressively rolling dice at each other. And being able to describe that kind of thing and pace it out and give people not only a chance to think, but also keep that heart-pounding adrenaline going at all times. This chapter walks through, really, the proper pacing for running combat in your games on the next level, with suggestions and rules on how to run specific things and how to keep things going without characters getting bored, without players getting bored. And I'll tell you, as a storyteller, as a storyteller who runs multiple games a week, that's the challenge. And this gives you new tools as a storyteller to not sit around and just describe the madness around, but to make it an integrated storytelling experience where the players are also participating. That's when it stops being about how to do things and starts introducing madness. Because this game also teaches you how to build Methuselah characters, how to build elders, Methuselahs, and what they are affectionately calling blood gods in this. If a Methuselah is 5th and 4th generation, blood gods are the antediluvians. This chapter tells you how to build them, how to use them, and also has a very substantial listing of elder, Methuselah, and blood god disciplines, which are mind-blowingly terrifying in use in a chronicle. Reading what these things can do is just disturbing at best, at how unstoppable they are. These creatures are a force of nature. And this chapter completely encompasses how disturbing they can be. But it's up to our imaginations to put them to use if we think our games are ready. Because, oh my god, the details that they put into these disciplines, these strange powers, are incredibly horrific. I spent a good time reading through these out loud to people in my household, and everybody was like, no, that doesn't need to happen. But, like, the way that they're set together is not necessarily game-breaking if your players are imaginative enough to let things happen. And also understand that these are creatures who have probably been asleep for millennia and don't understand modern things to an extent. So it is really outthinking. Having the modern knowledge to be able to beat something of this age. And they might not be able to beat it. They might just have to escape it. But either way, the rules in here are just devastatingly graphic. And I enjoy the hell out of it. Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is an interesting overview of the various factions. And these factions are ancient. Like, a lot of them are very, very old and have been worshipping vampires. Some of them are blood cults. Some of them are Methuselah cults. Some of them are just underground factions. The servitors of Irad are listed in here and how they work. The Mora from Cult of the Blood Gods, the Cappadocian childer of Constantia, who caused all of the problems. She has a faction listed in here. There's full-on set loyalists who want to get anybody who's not ministry out of the ministry, and anybody who's not Setite out of the ministry. They're listed in here. This chapter is just it's just a listing of the factions and how they work, and descriptions on how to build characters and some example NPCs. This is a fun chapter because it's not your Sabbat, Anarch, Camarilla stuff anymore. It's spreading out into other options. You could have characters who are involved in these factions. Your characters could be fighting these factions. There's really not much to say here unless I wanted to list all of them, which I don't, because you guys have got to see these. Not to mention, I'm probably on this playlist going to end up doing a video deep dive into each of these factions, because they're just so... They're new, but they're not. These guys have most likely been working around in the background forever, and a few of them, I can tell you, have been in other books. But this expands them in the ways that I don't know if a lot of storytellers would have thought about doing it. Okay, so Chapter 6 is a collection of sample stories you can run. They're all really, really good. I did read through these. They involve, like, Methuselahs and different factions and the circulatory system and stuff like that. And personally, I'm not much of a pre-written story runner. I find I get lost. I like them, but I tend to take the ideas and do my own thing. But yeah, I really wanted to pop in and say that these stories that they have listed are great. Personally, I'm mostly a fan of the circulatory system story that's in there because it's more of a street level thing. And it's the first one in there. I think it's called like Bloody Business or something. I'm just completely popping off because right after Chapter 6, which is these amazing stories that they provide, are the appendices, where they list a bunch of charts on like how to do new ideas for messy chronicles and bestial failures and things like that. Great storytelling stuff that can add a lot to your stories so that you're not just doing the same thing over and over again when it comes to your messy crits. After that, however, there are lore sheets in here that are amazing and will be covered, because not only do we have like the Eternal Arena, whatever, that's fun. Beckett has a lore sheet. Tigurius has a lore sheet. Like, yes, these are things like I have not understood why there has not been a Beckett lore sheet until now. I am so excited about the Beckett lore sheet. Um, but anyway, that right there, guys, that's been my look, my cover to cover look. This is the back cover, actually, the picture that's behind me, of Gehenna War. I just got done reading this entire book. It's not that big. It's only about 160 something pages, but it has so much information for running a game set in the Gehenna Wars, for new ideas on how to describe the graphic violence that some of you are craving so much in your action stories. The new disciplines in here are just a godsend to add to a chronicle, the ones for the players and the ones for the NPCs alike. These are just a lot of fun. And I hope that I do think personally that if you are looking to flesh out your Vampire the Masquerade library, your World of Darkness library, if you want to run a Vampire the Masquerade game, there's seriously, to have everything that you need to run a game, you only need 2 books. You need the core book, which gives you pretty much everything you need, but if you want to have like the rest of the clans and stuff, you also need that player's guide. But this book right here is definitely a well worth addition to anybody's full library of World of Darkness stuff. Your Vampire the Masquerade source book for the Gehenna War has so many ideas, and welcomed ideas for me on how to run combat as somebody who, guys, you know me. This is my livelihood. I run Vampire the Masquerade. I run Hunter the Reckoning. I run Werewolf the Apocalypse. I love running World of Darkness games. The system is so just comprehensive and story driven. It's not just rolling dice and doing math and having out of character conversations about what's happening constantly. You can just stay in the game. And this book right here adds so much to that. It gives so much detail on running conflict. And it gives so much detail on different ways of handling situations, so that you're not just running the same aggressive dice rolling sessions over and over and over again. So you guys know what my opinion is on it. This book is well worth it. I definitely would say that the Gehenna War book is completely worth adding to your World of Darkness library. I am Voivode Maquette. This is our World of Darkness, and thank you for joining me into this episode of Cover to Cover, featuring Gehenna War, a source book for Vampire the Masquerade, put out by Renegade Game Studios. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me while I read this, and thank you very much, Renegade, for putting this book out. Good evening.